is Alfred Sant from S&D Group.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by congratulating the Commission for having streamlined the semester process and refocused the country-specific recommendations, not least by reducing their number and concentrating their trust. In its report, the Commission starts by noting that, I quote, growth is returning to the EU, but says that developments leading to it are largely short-term. This reminds me of the IMF's verdict regarding how competitiveness is being regained in Europe. It is being done mainly through a reduction in unit labour costs that is greatly dependent on shedding of labour. Indeed, we are all aware of how fragile the current recovery remains. Meanwhile, the past and present reliance on so-called structural reforms to bring about so-called flexibility in labour markets has had serious social consequences. Beyond the effects of recession, it has cut on living standards. It has injected insecurity in the lives of millions, young and old. It has failed to reduce unemployment significantly, not least because it has helped to depress demand. Ultimately, the verdict about what we are doing is not given by the markets, but by voters. Beyond the concerns about immigration, recent election results in Italy, Spain, France and Denmark show voters are less than impressed by Europe's economic outturn. Unfortunately, our assessments do not focus enough on the divergences that are increasing. Many citizens are experiencing them in their daily lives. Divergences between regions within the Union, such as North and South. Precarious work practices, such as low pay, job insecurity, lack of access to social security and training are still a reality in many member states. Sometimes, even in these country-specific recommendations, we seem to be confusing economic policy coordination and convergence with convergence in terms of economic output and performance. Policy convergence as of now may be premature and harmful, given the existing divergences. We cannot leave people with the impression that instead of managing markets, Europe is being managed by the markets. So, my question, would the recovery have been less fragile if the current dogma about fiscal consolidation were bent sufficiently, made more flexible sufficiently, to allow for social repair in the communities that have been worst affected by the crisis and the subsequent quote-unquote reforms?
Thank you. Next speaker, Sofia Ribeiro, EPP.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Presidente. Saúde igualmente à mesa e saúde assim também.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome that first conclusion that we need to make an additional political effort to achieve normal growth. Economic growth should have a positive impact on the labour market, in particular unemployment among young people. A lot of research backs that up. It's important for member states to take part in developing new measures to promote economic growth. In Portugal, we have tried to bring about growth, but it doesn't seem to work as well. It's better if you invest more. We need the right kind of sustainable investment, like the Juncker plan, if we are to create jobs. Member states also have to have responsible tax policies and do the necessary restructuring. And in so doing, they need to bear in mind the need for social reform in a market economy where social concerns are taken into account. We need better social protection too. And if we don't have the right kind of growth in the Eurozone, then the countries that have a deficit, excessive deficit, will not be able to pay it off. So we need to look at the social security regimes in some countries, given the very high levels of unemployment. There is a subsidiarity problem here. We know that when it comes to pensions and minimum income subsidy and unemployment allowance, or benefit rather, each country has its own specific system. We need to keep our security systems going. But to what extent is that taken into account when we look at means of getting rid of or reducing structural deficit? What's more important than recommendations on paper is understanding that all these recommendations should not lead us to forget the great difficulties that Europe's citizens are living through and the efforts that they are making. And as such, we must speak with a single voice the European authorities. We can't congratulate our citizens on their efforts that they've been making and at the same time tell them that there's still more to be done.
So, Anthea McIntyre.
Thank you. It's good to see the Commission's positive report on the UK. It says that the UK economy continued to grow, that unemployment continues to fall, and that employment is expected to grow at a rapid, that's the Commission's words, not mine, 1.9%. Indeed, the latest figures published last week confirm this and show that wages are rising at their highest level for 7 years, 2 million people more in work in the last 5 years, and, very pleasingly, a record number of women in employment. The Commission has previously highlighted the fact that structural reforms and a flexible labour market in the UK has had a positive impact on employment levels. And last month, the ECOFIN Council conclusions said that there is a need for policy action and strong commitment to structural reforms in all member states, including by creating the right conditions for growth and jobs. In terms of looking at what the EU can do to help member states, would the Commission agree that by reducing the complexity of legislation, we could help create the right regulatory environment for businesses to create jobs? More specifically, would the Commission consider that by withdrawing or reducing the complexity of particular pieces of legislation, we can embrace change and make a long-lasting revamp of our labour markets? For example, given that 16 out of the 28 member states currently use an opt-out on the Working Time Directive, would the Commission consider that perhaps this is one of the pieces of legislation that could be withdrawn in order to help member states create more and better jobs?
Thank you. Vice President Dombrovskis, would you like?
Okay. Thank you for those questions. So on the first question on EU's and euro area's economic growth, indeed we see that this growth and recovery is gradually strengthening. Our spring economic forecast is slightly more positive than winter economic forecast, but still we see that it's quite slow recovery. We are talking about recovery of 1.5% this year in euro area. So our task is to work towards strengthening the recovery. And we believe that the policy mix which we are having right now, accommodative monetary policy, together with broadly neutral fiscal stance, because we expect to have broadly neutral fiscal stance this year, is appropriate policy mix in a given situation. But it's true that growth is now supported by certain short-term factors like lower oil prices, like quantitative easing of the ECB, like correspondingly also the weaker euro, and we will not be able to rely on all those factors all the time. So that's why we need to use this time wisely to address the structural problems in our economy. Then to move questions on the growth, also on youth unemployment. As you know, youth unemployment is certainly one of the main priorities of European Commission to have really effective implementation of this initiative. We recently have announced additional advanced financing to the member states which are benefiting from this youth guarantee, so that member states can implement this program as quickly as possible. And also in 5 President's report, which I mentioned in the introduction, just to mention some of the elements. Also come back to the previous question. We are having a strong element of convergence there, meaning convergence among member states, but also convergence within member states. It's certainly a priority to reduce also income disparities and other elements. And we are discussing the idea of setting social protection floors, also in the Five Presidents' report, to address your question. Well, on UK's performance, yes, you are right. UK is performing relatively well. In terms of complexity of regulation, as you know, European Commission has recently started so-called better regulation initiative. We are also doing this REFIT initiative, so we are looking on the ways how to really make EU regulation better and more effective. Also, there were a number of questions still, I think, both on social and economy. Maybe commissioners then can outline them in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Marianne Thyssen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Sant, I can just add or make reference to what Valdis just said. We are going in the direction, or willing to go in the direction of a socle social commun, a minimum floor, social minimum floor for social protection, and to more convergence within and among member states. So I would encourage the members in this House that are willing to go that direction with us to support the Five Presidents' report on this. Also, the President of the Parliament participated in this work, and that we can have an agreement at European level so that we can really deepen the economic and monetary union, because this will help us to go in the direction that you also want to go. To Mr. Ribeiro, to Madame Ribeiro, how can we make the social security systems more sustainable? This is important, this is indeed a real challenge. And if you look at the country-specific recommendations, it is really also something that we want to encourage member states to do so. It's not in our hands. We can give the member states recommendations because the organisation and the way of financing social security is in the hand of the member states. But it is an important aspect of the country-specific recommendations, because a sustainable social security system is in the interest, is of course important for the whole European Union. But that is why the reason why